We've got to change that narrative. We need to change that perception because if we don't, that's not going to be great for the commercials of a pharma company longer term. And as I said earlier, it's not going to be great for the patients that need the support and help.
Hi, and welcome to Content Matters, the podcast where we go behind the scenes of content in high stakes environments. I'm your host, Natalie Koo, and today I'm joined by Phil Blackmore, who's the creative director at Create Health. Create Health is one of the UK's leading healthcare and medical creative agencies, and we're here to talk about why trust is the most important currency of the next generation of healthcare. Phil, you're dialing all the way from Bristol today.
Good morning. How are you?
Wonderful. So, why does this work matter to you?
Oh, great question. I think it matters because at the end of the day, if you strip all the material things away, ultimately all we have is our health. Some of us are born and blessed to have that, and others are not. So I wanted to do work that made a meaningful difference, something that I could feel proud about, and my kids would be proud that their dad had done. So for me, having experienced loss as a child of my sister, having loved science at school, but being pushed by teachers down more of an artistic route. It's phenomenal some 30 odd years later to be running my own business that specializes in making science accessible, using creativity to connect, and hopefully getting more HCPs and patients to realize that there are options out there for them and paths to leading happier and healthier lives.
You mentioned the loss of your sister at a young age. Do you think that has impacted how you lead?
I think it's impacted my life full stop. That might be an obvious thing to say. I think I mentioned to you last time we caught up that I'm writing a book on optimism because fundamentally losing Lizzie when I was young massively changed how my whole family dynamic functioned and the way in which my parents brought me and my little sister up. So I think we were raised with this belief of anything's possible, a can-do spirit. I think all of those formative years, building blocks are absolutely a huge part of how I lead and how I want to lead. The beauty of working in lots of agencies, big and small, prior to setting up my own was I was able to observe what I thought worked well, what didn't. And so I was like a magpie and kind of storing as many cool things as I could so that when I had the chance to build my own business, I wanted to be the best of everything I'd experienced, not some of the terrible things I'd seen over the years.
You've even mentioned to me before how before you started working and built this agency, you had previously worked on all sorts of accounts that were bad for your health, which is quite ironic.
Yes, I'm making up for my sinful acts in the advertising world. I grew up in a very small countryside town in the UK, and I couldn't wait to leave the Shire and run off to the bright lights of London. I found myself working for some fantastic agencies. None of them really had any health accounts or even OTC. It was all cars and drink and loads of credit cards. They were phenomenal accounts to work on. I learned so many amazing things about creativity and craft. After 14 or so years of doing that, it just felt a little soulless. I wanted more purpose, and it made sense to go into the world of biology.
Bring the conversation to Create Health. You've delivered some of the most bold and innovative campaigns for some pharmaceutical companies. One campaign that caught my eye when we were chatting was Find the Impossible campaign. Do you want to tell our listeners what that was all about and what it achieved in regards to impact?
Absolutely. We've done loads of cool things over the years, but this one is important because I think this proved firmly to clients that creativity is the cure. It's really easy for a creative bloke to stand up and say it. I think when clients experience it, suddenly it has a whole new meaning. Bigfoot was a fabulous campaign. BD had an amazing multi-omic solution. The research community just weren't quite understanding the power of this kit. After we did some research, we found out that the vast majority of people in this space were really pushing for the next big breakthrough. They wanted to find the impossible. They wanted to be up in the halls of fame for science. Knowing what drove this audience gave us a strong insight to play with creatively. The whole find the impossible part was if that's what they're looking for, why don't we be a bit playful here? Why don't we look at almost suggesting that with this equipment you're able to find something like a Bigfoot, which of course none of us know if it exists. So we went down the route of telling the story of a group of scientists that used this solution to prove that Bigfoot was real. And I personally loved it. We had a custom Bigfoot suit made by the same people that worked on Alien and Star Wars. And this thing was amazing. We had a method actor who was about 7 foot tall who had spent his whole life specializing how to behave like a creature. And we did film work, we did short stories, we did a lot of photography. The campaign was just phenomenal. And I remember the clients were really split. Half of them were like, I love this, and the other half were, my goodness, what are we doing? We must be mad. Particularly the more compliant people in the room were worried. It connected beautifully with the audience and delivered. I think the ROI was over 3,000% in terms of return, and commercially, it was a great move for BD. It was so successful, we kept doing more and more of it. So the campaign lived for quite some time, and the clients saw the power of creative. That was a really lovely moment for us.
Off the back of that, what's the one thing you would say to other people working in agency that you learned or that they should put into practice?
So Bigfoot was actually one of what we call our wild card ideas, not necessarily because it was an animal. We like to look at how we can push our response to a brief from a client, but we always give an extra idea that's a little bit further out there to really get the clients to think. Sometimes by going so far out there, it helps the client pick the idea you want anyway, the one in the middle. Bigfoot was a slightly crazier idea, but what was encouraging is that it caught the attention of some people in the room. I think a job for an agency is to always be brave, to be courageous. It's to show them things that they're not expecting because ultimately they will love you for it because it keeps their minds ticking over and fresh.
Speaking of compliance, you talked about how some campaigns you've had to pull because of these issues. Can you explain to us what exactly happened and maybe what you learnt about mitigating that in the future?
I can't share specifics of campaigns because of various paperwork that's in place, but yeah, I think there's always learnings on these things. I think it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of you can work really hard, particularly in pharma, with teams and get things medically signed off and be as robust with all of your compliance needs, etc. That doesn't mean the competitors aren't going to still constantly look for some kind of weakness or slight kind of point that they can play on. And that's typically what's happened to us in the past is we've had some really great work go out there and the competitor has looked for how can we try and disprove this claim, etc. Ultimately, as an agency, we can only do so much. Ultimately, the data and how a company backs something up sits with them. I think the learning is really to make sure that when you've got a great idea and you're about to put it out into the world, make sure you've done your homework, work as close as you can with the compliance teams, almost war game it and think, right, what are the competitors going to do? How are they going to try and take this down? And be prepared for it early on so that it doesn't catch you out. There's nothing worse than seeing months of hard work from both clients and agency go out there, it start to have an impact, and then suddenly it can't go any further because of someone who's managed to find something they think is a substantious code issue, etc.
Wow, what an experience.
Thankfully, not one we've gone through too many times, but when it does, it's always really sad. The code is the code for a good reason, and I think it's also interesting in terms of how pharmaceutical companies interpret codes as well, because I think they take such a huge step back from what the codes are actually saying, and they make it even harder sometimes. They tie their hands behind their back. So again, agencies need to support them, give them
Mm.
confidence, and help them.
Speaking of trust when it comes to content and campaigns in the industry, you have just released a white paper that talks about trust in healthcare, and I am absolutely fascinated by it. Can you share with our listeners a one sentence summary of what it's about?
Absolutely. So we went out to 100 HCPs and senior marketeers to understand why there is a trust gap between Gen Z HCPs and pharma. We've done it because we can see a problem coming. The next generation are coming through and they don't have a particularly positive image of the pharmaceutical industry. I want to be part of the charge that's changing that. But to do that, we have to understand what they think. We have to actively listen, which is something pharma don't do enough of, in our opinion. That's why we've done this white paper, is to really pull out some key statistics and some key things so that pharma can change their ways and they can evolve.
Yeah, so this trust issue, we look at the workforce and we know that Gen Z is going to be making up a huge proportion in the coming years of healthcare professionals. If pharma can't win them over, what's at stake here?
I think it's important to say that pharma can win them over. I was at an event in Amsterdam last week where we were discussing, is there a level of arrogance within pharma where they've had it their way for so long? Are they prepared to change? The positive headline is that pharma are prepared to change and they recognize that they need to evolve. It's absolutely paramount that they do. I should just say that we don't believe the trust issue is just with Gen Z. We think millennials, which make up a vast majority of the workforce already, have a similar feeling. We are exploring that in a second edition. The crisis here is that if trust isn't built, then it's only going to be the patients that suffer. It means that HCPs are not going to necessarily be having all the information they could to give a diagnosis or a suggestion that might be different. And that doesn't mean they're not doing their jobs right now. Of course they are. But if pharma's job is to help instill trust and make sure amazing science is understood so that there isn't just one pathway, there could be multiple pathways for a patient. If those barriers of trust gap widen, then it's only going to be the patients that suffer. That needs to change. I really hope that pharma will evolve and change their ways over the coming years.
So, what are some of the most shocking findings that came out of that research for you?
There are three numbers that stick in my mind. The first is that of all the HCPs we surveyed and interviewed, 70% of them don't trust pharma. They've got real perception issues with them as an organization. They don't think that they're being authentic or honest, and they think that they're largely trying to profiteer, which is not a good thing. I think another one of the statistics that really hit home was that 66% of these HCPs feel completely left out of the conversation. That's a massive missed opportunity, in our opinion. From many of the doctors and nurses that we have spoken to, they actively want to partner with companies that want to make a positive difference. They want to be part of the conversation. They've got good ideas, but pharma just aren't including them in the conversation. And that's such a problem because there's a real opportunity to build good, meaningful connections with them that are only going to serve pharma well in the later years. And perhaps the final number that I found really interesting is we went and interviewed senior marketeers in pharma. A whopping 74% of them put their hands up and said, yeah, we know our communications are excessively corporate. We know we're really old-fashioned, and we're fully aware that we're not really doing anything to communicate with this audience in a meaningful way. That's the one that probably worried me the most. I was expecting negativity from HCPs based on other trends we're seeing around trust in this generation, but the fact that so many people in the client side went, yeah, we know that there's a problem. It's like, why aren't they doing something about it?
One thing that I picked up on is your mention around how upcoming generations don't really care for polished campaigns as much as they care for impact and meaningful collaboration. So,
Yeah.
when you say that they don't feel like they're part of the conversation, can you be more specific or explain how they might expect to be part of the conversation and what mistakes brands are making when they're excluding them?
A sweeping statement here, and it may be different in each country, but from our understanding and from what we've observed, ultimately, pharma are as an industry, prioritizing conversations with clinical individuals that ultimately have the power to sign off and use their medicine. And whilst that makes perfect commercial sense, by not including the up and coming generation, they're losing an opportunity to interact and show the good that they do. I love this space that I work in. I've done it for 11 years. Science is everything. Science is just super cool. And it really upsets me that there are so many individuals out there who seemingly think this is a really tarnished and bad industry. When you think of the amount of years and the amount of R&D and how COVID's a great example of how the pharmaceutical industry can come together and solve a huge problem. We've got to change that narrative. We need to change that perception because if we don't, that's not going to be great for the commercials of a pharma company longer term. And as I said earlier, it's not going to be great for the patients that need the support and help. So yeah, pharma just need to start including this generation in the conversation because there's a real opportunity to hear their alternative views, maybe other things that haven't been considered, and maybe actually treatment becomes far more holistic. Maybe it isn't always that we need a pill for every solution. Maybe there are other things that the pharma industry could support with so that it's not just about sick care, it's about prevention as well.
In the research that you've done, there are some really great things that come out of pharma, but maybe they're not sharing the right stories. Would you say that that's fair? And can you elaborate a little bit more?
I think it's absolutely fair. Different countries operate with different legal frameworks and codes. I think they're often used as an easy scapegoat and an excuse if pharma companies don't talk about the good they're doing, which is frustrating because it's lazy. Pharma don't put enough stock in how brand awareness and brand building works and why marketing really matters. They put so much emphasis on the sales aspect of things, but as we know, sales and marketing are not opposites, they are complementary functions, and actually, they both need each other to survive and to thrive. One of the things I find interesting is if you look at other sectors, like the car industry, for example. They have these shows every year where they show you what a car of the future might look like, these concept cars, etc. We also see it in the fashion industry, the couture catwalks, etc. None of those things end up necessarily coming to be, but there might be aspects on that dress or car that suddenly we start to see everywhere. Everyone goes, that's a really good idea. I'm not for 1 minute saying that we parade drugs out or anything like that, but I do think we could learn from other sectors in terms of how we take our audience on a journey and excite them about what we're working on and the future we're trying to build. I think pharma have got such an opportunity to talk about how they imagine disease management might look like in 5, 10 years in respiratory. Can they give us a hint? What are they working on? What's their purpose? What's their mission? These are things that particularly Gen Z care about, and probably a lot of millennials do too. So, given that that's the bulk of the workforce, it feels like a hugely missed opportunity to not be talking about these pieces. And as I said, I think there is a lazy mindset here and just an excuse of, oh, the code doesn't let us. I'm pretty sure the code does. It's just that you don't want to do it. I hope with what we're finding and the report findings that we're sharing, that will start to prompt people to think differently.
Well, with your expertise that's both strategic and creative, Phil, I would love to ask, does that mean you have a playbook up your sleeve for if you were to talk to a room full of marketers of pharma companies, like what are you telling them to do to connect with these younger generations?
We do have a playbook. First thing they need to do is start actively listening by setting up groups and boards of a really good, diverse, and inclusive mix of HCPs. I've heard of clients starting mentor programs where they're getting the KOLs that are big and established to start working with those that are up and coming. Again, want to see more of that. Want to see more sharing of ideas. Ultimately, the only way we progress as a species is by getting multiple viewpoints. There's lots of opportunity here. Once we establish and have proven that trust is a problem, I think you can then start to look at how do you build those bridges back.
I like what you've said in your report that if the conversation isn't happening with you, it's happening about you.
Yeah, absolutely. It is happening about them. As I said, that arrogance I referred to earlier needs to move on. Trust is a fascinating topic. I'm talking about it from a health perspective, but trust scores globally are probably at an all-time low. There's dissatisfaction with governments, the financial sector. There's a whole host of areas in our lives where people are questioning whether we're being told the truth. So this isn't just a pharma problem, but pharma have a real opportunity to take a positive step forward and do things differently. Wouldn't it be nice if other sectors were looking at them for a change of saying, what can we learn from them, rather than it often feeling like it's the other way around?
What does the vision for the future look like, Phil? What does it look like when you have a young healthcare professional talking to a patient and the utopia is they do trust the pharma companies? What does that look like?
The utopia, as you put it, is what I'd love to see pharma at the moment largely turn up and broadcast with the messaging they want to say. It's funny when I listen to clients talk about the fact that it's all about the patient. It is, but you're not selling to the patient, you're actually selling to the HCP. So you can tell me that it's all about the patient, but really it's about that key connection between you and the HCP. And I think what I'm desperate to see in the future is a far broader mix of channel use and formats. One of the big things that we keep trying to get people to understand is that no doctor has time to sit there and go through a 200-page report. None of them have time to sit there for a couple of hours whilst an MSL goes through 200 slides of the latest, greatest data. There are 3 C's that I live by. The work that you do needs to be consumable. It needs to be fit for purpose in terms of the audience it's going for. It needs to be creative so it connects and they care about it and it breaks through the noise. And obviously, it's got to be compliant. It's when you get the balance of all 3 of those together that you create work that has magic in it and it drives that change that you're pushing for.
When you were doing your surveys, were there any really interesting stories that stuck with you? Any testimonials? I'm just a young person. I feel like I don't believe this. Was there any specific quote that came out and shocked you?
There were quotes that made me sad listening to senior marketeers from pharma essentially bare their soul and talk openly about the fact they know they're not doing a good enough job. There was talk of, well, I don't want to push because I don't want to be the disruptor. I empathize with the fact that they've got a job to do. You've got to be really brave to stick your head up and say, I think we should do things differently. But if you don't have any of those individuals, you fall into this herd mentality of just doing the same things you've done every year. And as much as that delivers probably a consistent level of returns, it's not really shifting anything, is it? Maybe it's easy for me because we're an independent agency, we've got freedom to do what we want, and we're nothing like as big as these huge corporates. But I just think it's really sad to think that maybe companies aren't innovating or pushing because the culture doesn't support it. One of the sad things for me was there's so much talk of innovation in healthcare, but is it really happening? Or is it kind of a veneer? I'd love to see true innovation and more people rebelling, being disruptive, and actually pushing for better. We're maybe in the early stages of that, but I really hope over the coming years we see more people looking up to people that were prepared to stand up and going, well, they did it. So I'm gonna stand up and say my piece as well. And I think that could lead to really exciting futures for us all.
In addition to your Bigfoot campaign, were there any other campaigns in healthcare in recent years that caught your attention and are a good example?
There's loads of work that gets done that I sit there and think, I wish I'd done that. There was one that I remember really stuck with me because we'd done something interesting with sound, but this one was really cool. So there was a campaign done called The Most Beautiful Sound. Ultimately, it was the sound of cancer cells dying and being killed by the medicine that you were being given. It was an American campaign that's won countless awards. And as I said, it's called The Most Beautiful Sound, definitely worth looking up. Essentially, it was based on the fact that for a cancer patient, they don't want to just hear, oh, it's going to be okay. That's not comforting enough. So, how could we make them feel better? Some very clever people captured the sound of cells dying. This was an audio experience that patients could listen to whilst they were being treated. So, it gave them a sense of what was going on in their body. I think that's a beautiful idea. Scientific, geeky, and filled with empathy and understanding of what a patient is going through. That's a campaign I wish I'd done. There's another one here in the UK from Macmillan called Whatever It Takes. Even now, a couple of years old, every time I watch the TV ad on YouTube, I cry. It's such a raw depiction of what it's like for the HCP, the patient, the carers, the family. And that's the thing, isn't it? My big push to anyone listening is what if we thought less and felt more? As I said at the beginning, health is everything. You either have it or you don't. Health is wealth. What if we actually played more with that feeling rather than just always being so scientific and dry? We're talking about life here, so there couldn't be more amazing assets to work with to connect with people in a meaningful way.
What do you think are maybe three things that listeners can take away from you today?
First thing would be future's bright, be hopeful. Don't give in to all the negativity that the media like to pump into your head. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff being done. I think the other big thing for me would be that we need more creativity, not just in health. So much of the marketing and advertising out there is bland. It's a sea of sameness. There's nothing particularly original. I think that's because agencies aren't fighting enough. I think we're letting clients dictate too much. Agencies are filled with people who have studied their craft and are very experienced and experts in how to communicate. So I think we need to stand for what's good and push for better. And I think the other big thing is that for me, certainly in recent years, has often felt like an us and them agency client. The best work happens when everyone it gets together. And when you are working on a project, make sure all stakeholders are involved. One of the things I find fascinating is how different departments within clients often get left out. For me, the best work happens when everyone's brought in at the very beginning. So that's all of your legal medical reviewers, your marketeers, commercial, all stakeholders are together. If you all at the beginning decide why you're going to do this project, what the outcome is you want, and why it matters, it's amazing what happens when everyone is on the same page at the beginning, because that's when beautiful work does make it out there. That's when you see the shift and the change, and campaigns like Bigfoot happen. And ultimately, that can either lead to phenomenal discoveries in health or it can lead to patients leading better lives. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? For me, I just want to leave a positive legacy of leaving the world in a better place than I found it. And that's what I'm shooting for.
Thank you, Phil. I feel like that we've covered so much, and I think there's some really interesting things that people can go look up now after a result of this podcast episode. So they can
Thanks.
look up Create Health and they can also look up your report. Where will they find the report, Phil?
If you head to the website, there is a section where you can download a copy of the report. If anyone has questions, connect with me on LinkedIn, Phil Blackmore, the ginger looking bloke. Very happy to answer any questions people have. Really happy to hear not just good, but also critiques. Again, we want to make sure this is a meaningful piece. So if people have ideas on what we could do next time, let us know. We'd love to hear that and start a conversation.
The report's called The Trust Crisis. Thanks so much. I hope you have an amazing rest of the day over there in the UK.
Thank you. Enjoy your evening.